Spurs trade reports just continue to intensify as a recent report from Chris Mannix of Yahoo indicates that the Spurs are the #1 team to watch when it comes to the Jaylen Brown sweepstakes. As Brian Wright is debating what to do this offseason, there are a lot of talks about moving potentially the #2 overall pick for Jaylen Brown. We have to dive into the recent report on Jaylen Brown. All these Spurs offseason talks are getting crazy, Brian, and you know what? It just keeps picking up today. Let's just bring up the quote from Chris Mannix. He said, "The team I'd watch the closest," by the way, source for this link down below as always, "the team I'd watch the closest with Jaylen Brown is probably the Spurs. Sure, I think the Spurs would love to make a run at Giannis, but do the Bucks ask for Stephon Castle? Like, is that on their wish list? And if it is, I can't see San Antonio doing a deal like that." And he kind of goes on to say, Brian, that like, look, the concern in San Antonio is that if you get a guy like Giannis, you create a championship window that has a closing date. And that's a problem for another day, but that's on the mind of the Spurs. That's why they want to hold on to Stephon Castle, so he can be the second guy opposite Wembanyama for a long time, assuming they trade that #2 overall pick. Now, to me, that's a big assumption, Brian, but hey, when we're talking about Jaylen Brown, it sure seems like the #2 pick would have to be involved here, especially with the talks for KD that don't involve the #2. You know, I don't love moving it, but what are your thoughts on Jaylen Brown being a guy that's recently linked to San Antonio?
I mean, Josh, we've talked a lot about this off air. I love what Jaylen Brown could bring to the San Antonio Spurs, but have you seen on multiple videos I've talked about, I'm reluctant to trade that #2 pick. However, I do feel that if there was a player to trade the #2 pick for, I would choose Jaylen Brown over Giannis just because of fit, just because of window of career that's left. Again, like they said, like that's a win now thing. And I'm not fully sure Giannis is the player that makes the Spurs favorites in the West. I'm not true. I'm not sure if that helps as much as a guy like Jaylen Brown, who's just as effective on the defensive end as he is on the offensive end. He can shoot the ball. I like Jaylen Brown's fit more, but again, for the #2 pick, it depends on what else comes with that. But I do think Jaylen Brown is a #2 pick type caliber player. But Josh, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Do you feel we could snag a guy like Jaylen Brown without giving that #2 pick with that 14th pick and knowing we have all of these different players and assets that would be honestly exceptional role players to play next to Jason Tatum?
I mean, like, again, yeah, it'd be great, right? I mean, again, like, we're talking about these talks for Kevin Durant. The report is, #14, Harrison Barnes and Devin Vassell. Now, I think part of that's because KD is older and he's expiring, and the Suns, they have a lot of work to do cap-wise. And the Celtics, look, they're in a tough spot, too. We know that. I mean, with Jason Tatum missing all the next year, they got to get out of, this second apron area. They got to move on from some of their big deals. We're hearing Holiday, we're hearing Porzingis, but Brown's one of these names that could be on the way out, too. If we can do it without the #2 pick or Castle, I think that would kind of be a bit of an ideal world, right? Now, again, the problem is, again, the money, Brian. Like, I think Jaylen Brown, I agree with you. I think he fits better stylistically with this team. I don't think there's any doubt he's a better shooter than Giannis. I think he's a better off-ball player than Giannis, but Giannis is obviously the better basketball player. It's hard to deny that. He'd make this team one of the best defensive teams of all time. But Jaylen Brown, again, $53 million this year, $57 the year after, then $61, then $65 million. We're talking we'd have him for another 4 years until the 2028-29 season. And again, you got to match the salaries if you're doing this. So we're talking probably, again, like Devin Vassell, Harrison Barnes, and someone else, maybe and Keldon Johnson, just to kind of make this start to work in a couple years, plus draft capital. Like, if the Celtics are willing to do something like that, maybe you might have to involve another team so that the salary works out for Boston, because the Spurs need to match the salary going out with the salary coming in, and the Celtics, they want to shed some salary. Are you concerned at all by, if the Spurs do make him a target, this kind of monster contract, considering that he has never really proven to be that kind of #1 superstar tier guy, that even though he's going to be making 60 mil?
Think that's true. I don't know if he hasn't proved that he's a #1 tier guy. I think he proved that when the Celtics won their championship, right? I think he proved to be the best player on that court. You saw Boston have success when Jason Tatum reeled it back a little bit. That's where they were able to have success. The years prior, it was Jason Tatum really doing all that, but it was Jaylen Brown who really, really stepped up big for them. So I think he is a superstar. I think he's worth the money. I think when you're trying to win now, which if you do make a move like that, you're trying to win now, you spend that bread, right? We haven't had to spend bread like that in a long time. We have some big contracts that we could move to make it work. And to me, I don't think it's going to be a problem the Spurs have, honestly, Josh, because I'm going to go out on a limb and say Jaylen Brown's not going anywhere.
Yeah.
I don't think you blow that up at this point. Like, they've been together so long. They've won a championship. I just don't see that duo being blown up unless it's for an amazing, phenomenal package. But I don't think Luka Doncic are falling out of the sky. So I think that they have enough pieces around them and enough depth on that Celtics roster to move all the other pieces to be able to keep Jaylen Brown and Tatum and say, who can we bring in here to play with them and that kind of fits off of them. So truly, Josh, I do not see Jaylen Brown going anywhere. However, if we could get our hands on him, I would love that because, again, I think he does all of the things that we need for the Spurs. Like, I think he's a better version of some of the guys that we already have. And I think we haven't really seen the Fox, Castle, Wemby. We haven't really seen what this team can do since that Fox trade. That Fox trade was supposed to be that one that put us over the hump.
Yeah.
And we haven't even seen that yet. And now we're talking about adding another star. So I just want to tell fans, like I've been telling them, pump your brakes a little bit. Let's see what this team can do. And again, I don't want to give up too much future capital when we have a guy like Wemby who we're going to have for 10 plus years now, Lord willing. Like I want to make sure that future is good because that's how the Spurs do it. They build teams. They don't go out. They're not the Lakers where they go out and get a star and then win a couple championships and then go back into non-existence. No, the Spurs win and want to stick to winning. So I think I want to keep that in mind when we talk about these stars.
Yeah, for sure. And look, I'm still team draft Dylan Harper. I mean, like I
Yeah,
love the
me
guy.
too.
I think he's good. Yeah, he's going to be phenomenal right now. And again, Jaylen Brown does fit that more prototypical small forward role that could work well with Fox at the 1, Brown at the 3, Wemby at the 5. That kind of core. You fill in the rest of the positions however you want, Castle, and then whoever at the 4, right? And so I think it works. But again, I think you're right here. Like, I find it strange that like the talk is, look, watch out for the Spurs. Like, yeah, the Spurs are the big team with Jaylen Brown. Again, I don't even know how this would work salary-wise because the Celtics need to shed salary. They'd have to, I don't know, waive someone or at least send them to another team in this deal. There'd have to be some weird stuff going on from them.
Yeah.
But then he also says, like, the Spurs aren't sure they want to create a championship window. And it's like, look, I know in the NBA you can only sign 4-year contracts. Well, Brown signed the 5 because it was the Supermax. But, regardless, that's because he stayed with the Celtics. You'd have him for 4 years here. And, like, yeah, you have him through the rest of his prime until he's 32. Although you could argue it's slightly post-prime. But, like, I don't know. I feel like this almost does create a little bit of a window as well, though, again, it does align, right? Again, you have De'Aaron Fox, who's going to have that extension, so you're going to have 4 years of Fox, Brown, and then Wemby all together, and that's a nice window when you can retool after that with salary coming off the books. But, yeah, Brian, I mean, honestly, like, if you ask me, tying up this much money, I think Jaylen Brown's a good fit, and I think he would probably be worth it, but I just feel like I'm on board with you, man. Like, we haven't built our identity by just going out and grabbing superstar left and right. Now, again, for the right price, I'm not upset at it. Like, again, we're talking this KD thing, especially if it's just for 1 year. He signs maybe a 1+1 with a player option the year after at, like, a reduced rate. That kind of thing I'm okay with. But, 4 straight years of Jaylen Brown, despite his amazing stats. I mean, we know 27 points per game just a couple years ago, 23, 22 points per game this year, finals MVP. I didn't mean to say he wasn't a superstar, but, I was thinking, like, we're talking tier 1, we're talking Kevin Durant, we're talking
Yeah,
Giannis.
I get what you're saying.
I think Brown is, like, right, just a bit below, right? And so if we're talking that much money, I start to get concerned about it. But I think you're right, man. I think ultimately, I don't think he's going to move, and I don't see the Spurs doing that. I mean, honestly, all these talks, Brian, as the days go by, the more trade reports, mock trade stuff come out, the more I'm confident this team's just going to draft and run with Dylan Harper.
I feel the same way. I mean, it's hard not to feel that way, especially too when you just look at Dylan Harper, you look at the workouts you've seen, you're listening to the buzz around Dylan Harper, and it's like, oh my gosh, we might have something special here. Like, and we know how valuable that guard play is, whether you have Fox, whether you have Stephon Castle. I really think you look at a guy like Harper and say, we can't miss on him. But I think the depth that we have across the board, man. I mean, we have the Jeremy Sochan, the Keldons, the Devin Vassell. I think that allows us to be able to play a different type of game where that number 2 pick doesn't even have to be traded unless it's for the right thing. But I know the right thing is going to happen in Spurs because Brian Wright's going to make sure it happens. He's shown us time and time again. He knows the right things to do, and it's worked out. And don't forget, we still have first-round picks on that bench that we're still trying to figure out. Malachi, Blake Wesley. These are guys, too, that I don't know how much value they have, but they're going to have to be making decisions on that, too. So, I mean, I think at the start, maybe a couple months ago, we did a talk about having guard depth.
Yep.
Well, what's better than having the number 2 pick and the former rookie of the year? So I'm also feeling like the number 2 pick is going to stay with Dylan Harper. But I do see moves happening with the Spurs. Yep. I just don't feel there's going to be something enticing enough to make them want to move that number 2 pick.
I think that's the exact thing there. I think a trade really has to be enticing enough for Brian Wright to say this is genuinely the best move for the Spurs if we're looking at the grand scheme of things. And I think a Jaylen Brown trade here, like, I'm having a tough time convincing myself that Brian Wright's going to see this and say, like, yeah, this is the best move long term to make the most value out of De'Aaron Fox Wemby stuff. Because look at the Fox trade. Like, Fox is a star in this league. I mean, you could argue he's near Jaylen Brown, probably a bit below if you ask me, but not that much further below. And we didn't have to give up that much in that kind of trade, right? Not the kind of number 2 overall pick. And again, you talk to some people, they'll say Dylan Harper would have gone number 1 in a lot of drafts. I'm seeing some people say he would have gone number 1 in Ant's draft. Obviously, that turned out differently, but at the time there were concerns. So anyway, there's a lot of rumors coming out every single day. What do you guys think about Jaylen Brown and the San Antonio Spurs? Would you send the 2nd overall pick in some kind of package form? I don't think we would, but we'd love to hear from you, because that'll do it for this episode of Spurs Digest. And if you enjoyed, hit the free subscribe button down below. We got big things coming all summer long. I'm Josh Gosse, my co-host, Bryan Colbert. We'll catch you in the next one.